what Reigns has said. You know, how many times do we need to see John Cena versus Randy Orton in a number one contenders match, in an Iron Man match, in a cage match, in an I Quit match? How many title matches, how many main events do we have to put up with before we finally see the Bray Wyatts winning the titles or the Cesaros winning the titles? Yes, they'll win the mid-card titles. It's only because they don't have enough confidence to give someone like Cesaro the WWE title because they're in fear of the ratings seeing a massive decline, which we would see probably if Cesaro was champion, only because they've never really given Cesaro, the King of Swing, the benefit of the doubt. I mean, Paul Heyman was his representative, and now Paul Heyman has gone from being his representative back to Brock Lesnar. He's crawling back to Brock Lesnar. Why? Because Brock Lesnar is challenging for the title against John Cena in their third match, making it a trilogy this year at SummerSlam. And as long as Brock Lesnar is with WWE and he's there challenging for the title, Cesaro and other clients that Paul Heyman has had, like Ryback and Curtis Axel, they're going to always be on the back burner. And how long is it going to be before that comes back and bites Paul Heyman in the ass? I would say it's not going to be very long before it all comes back to haunt Paul Heyman, some of the previous decisions he's made throughout his wrestling career. And trust me when I say this may sound like a bit of a shoot on Paul Heyman, but he's made more than one terrible decision in his career, either as a promoter of Extreme Championship Wrestling, formerly Eastern Championship Wrestling. He's either made more than one bad decision as a promoter or just a client in WWE. You know, it's just terrible when you see how far Paul Heyman has come and how little he's done. Yes, he may be described as one of the greatest wrestling managers of all time, but that's from the point of view of JBL. That's not from the point of view of 50,000 wrestling fans. That's not from the point of view of over 1 million viewers each week. That's from the point of view of JBL, who's worked with Paul Heyman. Obviously, he's going to put Paul Heyman over. That's the point of view of a commentator who's wrestled. That's not the point of view of over 1 million viewers each week. And I'm sorry to have to say that about Paul Heyman because he has done a lot of things. He's taken Stone Cold Steve Austin and The Undertaker to some of their first championships. Paul Heyman was one of the first original characters and one of the first original managers to pop up in professional wrestling. He was one of the first promoters ever not to give a fuck with ECW, Eastern Championship Wrestling, revamping it into Extreme Championship Wrestling. He was one of the first to never give a fuck, and because of that, I have a lot of respect for him. What I don't have a lot of respect for is some of the decisions that Heyman has made as a promoter, as a manager, and as an on-screen character and performer for WWE. Paul Heyman may be described as the greatest wrestling manager of all time, but in my opinion, and the opinion of millions of wrestling fans every week, he isn't. You're going to choose Paul Bearer, you're going to choose Freddie Blassie, you're going to choose Bobby Eaton, ever before you choose Paul Heyman, for giving the distinction of being the greatest wrestling manager of all time. And at one point, he was writing the SmackDown storylines, and I wish he still was, because he wrote some of the best storylines, especially in 04, 05, because if you go back 10 years ago, the storylines were far more entertaining than what they are now in 2014, and it's all because Paul Heyman isn't writing the storylines as much as what he did 10 years ago. Yes, he may have wrote WWE 13, and that's why 13 and 14 video game releases were so good, because he had a hand in writing the storylines for the fucking games from 2K Sports and THQ in recent years. If only he had so much of a hand of writing storylines as much as he did 10 years ago with The Undertaker and other talents in the WWE like RVD and the Dudley Boys, and he had so much creative control in ECW, ECW would still be a third brand extension implemented by WWE. But the reason why Heyman originally left WWE 6 or 7 years ago was because he was depressed over the direction of ECW, and he knew, along with the creative team, it was going absolutely nowhere. And if he would have known that ECW would eventually become NXT and he would have had nothing to do with the general manager role or a position of power in WWE when it came to creative control, he probably would have never come back for the revamping of ECW. But it was because of the novelty of the revamping of ECW, he had something to do with it. If you took, let's say, Triple H and Stephanie out of power in WWE and you replaced them with Paul Heyman, who was recently fired on Monday Night Raw before the return of Brock Lesnar, but a week before the Battleground pay-per-view, if you took the authority out of power in WWE, didn't have Kane there, didn't have Triple H, Stephanie, Randy Orton, whoever, The Shield, whoever, and you put Paul Heyman in the position of Triple H and Stephanie that they're in now, you would see higher ratings and you would see a lot more talent wanting to have something to do with WWE. with the exception of probably a few. You would see a lot more talent having something to do with WWE, with the exception of a few more talent, and you probably would have more wrestlers returning full-time to compete. You probably would see more of The Rock. You probably would see more of the Scott Steiners. You probably would see more of the Bill Goldbergs, because Heyman has been described over the past at least 15 years as an absolute genius, and that's something that I will give Paul Heyman an endless amount of credit for being, as a genius, because if not for Paul Heyman, we probably would have never gotten characters like Stone Cold Steve Austin or The Undertaker. It was Heyman who was a revolutionary force and a driving force behind these characters. So if you take Triple H out of power in WWE and you replace him with someone who's been a promoter for years and actually has experience being a promoter, yes, Heyman may be referred to by people like the Sandman and Sabu as a liar, but at least he has some kind of an idea on how to run a wrestling promotion. So give him the benefit of the doubt. Have Triple H behind closed doors like Vince is now, and have Paul Heyman running the company, and as a result of that, you'll get higher ratings and you'll get better reviews, along with a lot more wrestling fans tuning in every week to watch Monday Night Raw Super Show and Friday Night SmackDown and NXT even. You'd have a lot of people watching wrestling programming in terms of viewership if you had people like Paul Heyman running the show as opposed to someone like Triple H, not only for Raw and SmackDown, but for NXT and shows on the WWE Network. And you would expect the creative side of WWE to be at an all-time high, especially with the WWE Network. And the only thing they're being creative over is reality television and programming that are sub to wrestling shows where you actually expect good wrestling matches. You're seeing creativeness being brought up for Total Divas, Legends House, a lot of the WWE Network programming. And if you want creativeness, you have to subscribe, you have to purchase the WWE Network, and you have to watch it on the WWE app, because that's where we're seeing the creativeness coming out of WWE, because we're seeing anything but creativeness from the storylines, and that is really unfortunate. Then you wonder why so many creative writers hung up the phone on WWE and walked out on the company in the last minute, because they realized that WWE weren't far as creative as they may have been maybe 25, 30 years ago. I mean, the days of Hulk Hogan, Ric Flair, and Andre the Giant are long behind us, and the only reason they want something to do with WWE now is because of the Legends contracts, and because they don't have to make as many appearances on television as they probably would have had to in the early thousands, and because they're retired now. They don't wrestle anymore, and the Legends contract is a better offer than probably any other wrestling promotion or independent wrestling promotion could ever offer someone like Hulk Hogan. I mean, let's face facts. The only reason Flair and Hogan have something to do with WWE, it's not because we're going to see Hogan and Flair for the first time ever in a WWE ring like we have seen in WCW. It's not because we're going to get that dream match that WWE never gave us in the early 90s, late 1980s. It's because of these Legends contracts. Don't expect Flair and Hogan to tie it up for the first time ever here in 2014, 2015 for WrestleMania 31. I'd be very surprised if that happened, if Hulk Hogan returned because his back got better and Ric Flair wanted to give us one more match, as the old saying goes. It's not going to happen anytime soon. As long as a Legends contract exists, you're always going to see The Rock, you're always going to see Stone Cold Steve Austin, Flair and Hogan, and probably legends we haven't seen in years. I mean, we got the Ultimate Warrior before he died, but a week after he was inducted into the Hall of Fame, he may have passed away because of a heart attack, but at least we saw him because of the Legends contract and because of how much the Legends contracts offer. Probably the only good thing that's been derived from Stephanie and Triple H being in power of WWE, called power crazy and everything else, is these Legends contracts, because they are very flexible and they provide legends who have previously worked with WWE for many years opportunities they probably wouldn't have been presented with 10 or 15 years ago. For my column that I write for this website on a weekly basis called In This Corner with Jonathan Clarke, I referred to Stephanie and Triple H as being power crazy, the power couple who had unfortunately become power crazy with authority in the WWE. Do you agree with my statement of Triple H and Stephanie being power crazy as the authority? They are certainly more power crazy than they were 10 years ago when the McMahon-Helmsley era first came into fruition in WWE. But as a wrestling fan listening to this show on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, we are broadcasting our show on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and on Google+. For our fans on Google+, if you have Google+, you can find us on there at HEW Entertainment. But do you agree with my quote in my column this week where I wrote about how Triple H and Stephanie were power crazy? I want to know what you think of that. And you can tell me on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and on Google Plus if you have it. And you can tell me through the app if you've downloaded and installed it for your mobile phone or device. Triple H and Stephanie being power crazy. That was what I wrote for a recent column, which I recently archived in the archives of the column that I write weekly on this website, In This Corner with Jonathan Clarke. And for Cheap Shots with Jonathan Clarke, which is our Google video blog, which you can subscribe to at this video blog on YouTube, isn't enough for you. We have paid tribute to some of the earlier years of the McMahon Helmsley era in the early thousands. There are some moments up there which you might remember if you are a wrestling fan maybe 10 or 11 years ago. I prefer, honestly, the original McMahon Helmsley era when they were first in power, because Vince McMahon was still on television and he was still having something to do creatively with WWE ever since he was put on the back burner, not so much interest in what Triple H and Stephanie have to offer for wrestling fans. WrestleMania 30 was pretty good, but that doesn't mean WrestleMania 31, 32, 33, 34, and WrestleManias that follow are going to be as good as WrestleMania 30. And the only reason why is because they don't know what they're doing from one day to the next with WWE in terms of a creative direction. And I wish the fuck they really did, because right now WWE seems to be in an even more precarious position than it ever was 10 years ago. And they described 03 and 04. What was ironic about 2014 so much thus far past the halfway point of the year was that they described 2003, 2004 as some of the worst creative years in WWE. And you had Scott Steiner, Kevin Nash, and Goldberg involved with WWE in 2003, 2004. Fast forward to 10 years, the present time, I think it's worse than what it was back in 2003. Bring on the storylines from 03, and I'll start watching wrestling more than what I am now, and I'll start giving it the benefit of the doubt more than what I have been over the past at least 5 or 6 years, because in the last 5 or 6 years, it's been really atrocious. I mean, how does Randy Orton go from being in the main event of WrestleMania 30? I said this last week. How does Randy Orton go from being in the main event of WrestleMania 30 to losing matches at WrestleMania 30 to losing every match that he's in virtually since losing the championship? Yes, he put over Daniel Bryan with Dave Bautista tapping out, but Randy Orton didn't get pinned or wasn't made to submit in the WrestleMania main event, and the only thing that he's amounted to since losing the title is Triple H's bitch. And Dave Bautista came back, won the Royal Rumble. I don't know what the fuck happened there. He was tired of doing Triple H's beck and call, his dirty work, and then he walked out. We haven't seen him since. Hopefully, we're going to see Dave Bautista return sometime in 2014 when Brock Lesnar becomes the champion, giving Dave an excuse to return to challenge Brock Lesnar for a match that's been over 11 years in the making. We have waited 11 years, over a decade, for Dave